Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Yep. I still see some share screen up there too.
Wait,
Yeah, I think something happened. We're gonna have to, what, can you start again with your share?
just a second.
Perfect.
Okay.
So
All
this one's going to be very different from the prior two presentations in terms of the content and the nature of the analysis, but I think it's quite interesting. So take it away, Perry.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Perry Chailaivanichkul, and today I'll be presenting on my research on ASEAN FDI, trade agreement, and economic growth in Southeast Asia. We will look closely into the ASEAN framework and the implications of the foreign direct investment. So just to go over some agenda, we will look into ASEAN background on demographics and economic standings, growth driver, factors that drive economic growth within the region, currently an existing free trade agreement, and comparing trade volume between ASEAN and other nations. And we would also look closely into the RCEP, which is the world's largest trade agreement deal currently. Then we'll start zooming into analysis of the ASEAN FDI, RCEP influence on the FDI, some factors driving FDI in ASEAN, and some conclusion and next steps. So some overview. The Association of Southeast Asian Nation, or ASEAN in short, has 11 countries: Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Timor-Leste, and Vietnam. Currently, we have 656 million people in estimate, and it contributes to about 3.35 trillion in GDP. By 2030, we are expecting to be fourth largest economy combined in the world. So main factors that drive growth in Southeast Asians includes, one is rising income, where consumers, new consumers would increase by like 140 million by 2030, which is approximately 1/6 household worldwide. And with this emerging middle class, we expect to have a disposable income per capita of about $4,000. And we are also growing rapidly in working population. We are looking at a 40 million increase, which provides foreign direct investors and SME to expand a lot because of an abundance of labor force. The region is also going through some rapid digital transformation. E-commerce has become very booming, and shops or platforms such as Lazada and Shopee has transformed the way people are shopping in the region. So this also drives growth and purchasing within the region. So this allows the economy to grow by about 4% each year in the next decade. And also due to an ongoing conflict between US and China, and then the aftermath of COVID-19 supply chain bottleneck, a lot of the multinational enterprises started relocating their manufacturing hub into Southeast Asia due to availability of labor, cheaper labor, and also the trade agreement, and then some policies that are allowing them to come in. And so overall, these factors drive FDI within the region up by about 70 billion, which is an increase of 20% from 2014. And recently, the 2020 RCEP agreement has also opened up the entire region, not only within RCEP itself, but also for Western investors. But we'll look more closely into RCEP later. So looking at existing trade agreement, currently ASEAN have established more than 50 free trade agreement globally, but I would like to zoom into 3 main players, which are China, United States, and Europe. So China is the largest trade partner with ASEAN with more than about 600 billion in trade total. And then the trade agreement that we have, or that ASEAN has with China right now, eliminates over 7,000 products. We're expecting about 20% of year-to-year growth rate. And from these value, more than 15 billion comes from electronics alone. So they are not only exporting, but they're also importing parts from ASEAN because the manufacturing hub is growing and we can produce it cheaper than China now. So with the USA, currently there's no free trade agreement with ASEAN, but they use TIFA for economic cooperation. So it's more like a framework rather than an actual agreement. So currently, because USA was withdrawing from the TPP trade agreement during the President Trump era, they're also missing out on the CPPP, which includes China, Japan, ASEAN, and then United States. So with that said, I think USA really has to catch up on the free trade agreement because they're going to start missing out on the benefits and potential market growth within the region. And for Europe, there's also no current region-to-region free trade agreement. But they are working on the negotiation to have one. Currently, they only have free trade agreements with Singapore, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, which eliminates about 98% of tariff. So next is the RCEP. So this is the world's largest trade agreement to date, and it was signed in 2020 and include 15 members, including ASEAN, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. It has more than 30% of the world population in this trading bloc alone, and the estimated GDP is about 38 trillion US dollars. So right now, within this region, it eliminates 90% of tariffs on import, establish common rules of e-commerce, trade, and intellectual properties. And it is expected to add more than 200 billion annually to the world's income, and also about 500 billion to the world trade by 2030. So it is a very large and powerful trading bloc. There's a lot of potential for market growth. There would be the cost of production would go down because of the tariff that has been eliminated, and with tied into the growing the working population, I think this is the world's next manufacturing and market hub. So to zoom out a little bit, if you see from the figure on the left, you can see that this is comparing the current trading bloc of the world. US, Mexico, Canada has about 24.3. Europe, the EU is 18.8, and then RCEP is 25.84 trillion. So we are larger than America right now in terms of the whole trading bloc. So some key facts, how RCEP influences USA and the EU. So USA can expect a commercial trade shift from US to the RCEP member because of the lower manufacturing cost. But however, because USA was not part of this, it was also dropping out of other trade agreement prior to the signing of RCEP. China has gained in increasing influences over the region. They are investing a lot. They are giving a lot of FDI in ASEAN, and they have a lot of say in the policies driven in this region. So one of the key things that US should focus on is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, which I think President Biden has announced maybe last year. And this is probably going to help US establish its influences or hold on to its influences. However, there's been a lot of debate within the government of how this would be beneficial or not beneficial to the US. So it gone very heated and very political. So one of the research suggests that like if the US can secure this framework, it would be able to maintain its influences. But if not, China and other members in ASEAN and RCEP would definitely replace US as the leading trade partner. For the EU, one of the main factors that RCEP influenced was the cost reduction and facilitation of trade among RCEP. Because RCEP has such a good trade and tax incentive, this could drive European competitiveness of the products. However, EU can diversify their supply chain in RCEP, and this will be beneficial in the long run because it can provide market penetration, integration, less transaction costs, and easier exporting. Just looking at an overall picture of ASEAN FDI summary, as we can see, USA is still the largest player, with the intra-ASEAN coming into second. However, if you look at the overall pie, everyone combined in RCEP is much larger than EU and US combined. So right now, ASEAN is receiving about 174 billion, and we are the largest FDI recipient of developing world. And we have increased 12% from the pre-pandemic level. The intra-ASEAN, as I mentioned before, received about 21 billion, and manufacturing sector is rising 200% to $7.7 billion. And this is probably majorly because of the US-China conflict and the need to diversify the supply chain into other regions and not depending too much on China. So some of the key factors that are driving FDI in ASEAN. So right now, everyone is producing electrical vehicle. So a lot of the value chain has been like invested in ASEAN, more than $4 billion in investment. A lot of the OEM factories started establishing battery plants, started retrofitting their current existing factories. They're also investing in nickel mining, etc. Some of the key OEM investors include Hyundai, Toyota, Mitsubishi, and then Mercedes-Benz. There's also a lot of investment in semiconductors and electronics. As we were all aware that semiconductors are also running into supply chain issue during COVID. So many of the large companies are diversifying into ASEAN and then making a greenfield investment to build up brand new semiconductor factories within ASEAN. So as you can see, it's a huge growth from almost non-existent to 25% within a year. So everyone is just rushing into the region to establish a new semiconductor factories. And many of the investors came from China, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. And some of the companies include Intel, Siltronic from Germany, I believe, Infineon Tech, and then Samsung, and then Rome. And then the third major factor is the digital economy and Industry 4.0. So the FDI within this space rose 400% to $7 billion, and it's mainly in the data center investment. So Singapore has opened a few, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. So some key factors of RCEP, influencers in like the FDI landscape. So RCEP on its own is accounting for 15% of the global FDI, but within ASEAN, they're actually investing like 70% of its, 70% of its investment into ASEAN. It's also investing outward about 35%. The largest recipient being Singapore, and at almost 5 times its own GDP. So a lot of people are pouring money into Singapore, and I think this is due to its financial sector, also electronics and Industry 4.0, like all the data center within Singapore itself. And more than like top 100 MNEs from non-ASEAN RCEP's members also have presence in ASEAN. And within these companies, they invest more than 1.1 trillion in cash reserve in the region, and they invested in 14 trillion in assets. So as you can see, just from like this number, like within RCEP itself, we have a lot of investors just coming into ASEAN to set up their factories, their manufacturing ground. They're also investing in electronics and EVs. And within 1 year, just after COVID-19, the FDI got back up to the same level, and it's expected to increase every year. So just to look at the comparison of the top 10 FDI within ASEAN, the top 5 is pretty consistent throughout, being US, Japan, ASEAN, and then EU. But if you look closely into like the list of countries, you will see that like many of them are like the RCEP member. So next step for ASEAN, RCEP, and then US and EU. So for the recommendation, so since we have like 4% annual growth rate, and with the rising income, digital transformation, FDI, and shift from China, I think ASEAN should work on regional policy and socio-economic reform to connect the region better and prepare for an influx of investor that's coming in. Because right now, I think many of the countries are still not aligned with their like policies. So if we can align everyone to have to be on the same page, I think it would really improve the inflow of FDI. For the US, it is the second largest foreign FDI in ASEAN. And if the US can quickly implement the IPEF to maintain competitiveness and influence, US has a potential to maintain its economic power over the region, which it still does. But just to secure its position, they really should accelerate the implementation of this trade agreement. And then for the EU, which is the third largest trading partner of ASEAN, it should also expedite the regional FTA to maintain competitiveness, and also piggyback on the Green Deal from clean energy investment. There's a huge amount of money in the Green Deal right now. So if, let's say, they could diversify their supply chain into ASEAN and invest in clean energy, I think it would be very beneficial for them and help them reduce costs and also reach their Green Deal goal much quicker. Thank you, and I can open for any questions.
All right, Perry, you did an excellent job. Fantastic. I'm thinking way back to day one when you sat with me and you were describing what you were trying to do. It seemed like you wanted to understand and assess whether this region could become the next, if I can remember your words, economic powerhouse. I think that might have been the words you used, right? The next one, meaning we're replacing all other economic powerhouses in the world with this region in the near term, I guess, meaning in the next decade or two. Did you answer that in your mind? Did you actually come to a conclusion as to whether this is the next economic powerhouse?
I think we have the potential to become like an economic powerhouse, maybe not the top powerhouse, but the main player. Like it would put our name on the world stage. I feel like in the past 2-3 decades or so, we were not really well known in the world stage, but this would put us on the map, like in like the economical sense.
Well, I know Tesla's talking about putting a plant in this region. I thought it might have been Malaysia or Indonesia, one of those two, but I know they're looking at this region very carefully. I know this is a great market for them. They're selling their vehicles in this market very nicely. And there's probably EV take up faster in this market than in the US market. So that's pretty amazing. Have you thought about demographics at all? I noticed you didn't really cover it. Is that something that you think is a strength, a weakness of ASEAN, or neutral?
Oh, you mean demographics?
Yeah, in terms of like the overall
Yeah.
population, I guess in
Yeah.
terms of like,
So,
how is it a pyramid that's normally shaped, or is it inverted, right?
definitely like normally shape, like in terms of demographic, since
Yeah.
we have about one fourth of the world's population, very densely located within 11 countries.
Right.
Um, we we're definitely growing as a region. However, I don't think it is fair to compare like the income of this region, of the developing region, with the already developed world yet. I think what the advantage of this region is that we are still cheap in labor,
Yeah.
growing rapidly, a lot of working age group, which is
That's the
which is
key question.
a pro. Yeah.
That's the key question I guess I'm really asking. A demographic pyramid. Do you have enough young people to sustain your
Yes.
growth versus say
So I
the more developed world in terms of USA, North America, Europe, and Japan in particular, China, they're all suffering from an inverted demographic pyramid.
Oh, yes, we definitely have that. I was mentioning previously that like the working population is growing rapidly. It would increase like 40 million in that working bracket in like by like 2030. So it is still growing. So in terms of that working class population, we have more than sufficient to supply the production and the growth. Um, and that is definitely the problem that the first world country is facing, right? How like it's reverse pyramid where you get a lot of aging population and um not enough working population. So that's definitely one of the key benefits, that people are moving their manufacturing base into ASEAN.
So I would definitely recommend, if you were to augment this deck at all, I would include some specific demographic pyramid comparisons between definitely Japan,
Mm-hmm.
China, EU, North America, and ASEAN, because I think ASEAN's one of its strengths is that you're going to have the young people similar to Mexico, which has, by the way, quite a few young people and a very healthy pyramid. That is what's going to drive, I think, future growth in your region
Mm-hmm.
and sustainability in terms of just keeping those plants running. Japan can't keep their plants running. South Korea has a significant problem as well, keeping those plants running. So
Mm-hmm.
that's going to, I think demographics is going to be a rate limiting factor. Are there other rate limiting factors that would keep this region from growing into the future? Like
Definitely
for example, energy,
politics.
and
I think
energy
it's
might
not.
be currency stability, politics, you name it,
Mhm.
right?
It's definitely politics, number one, because politics and policy drive um, any regulations on energy and infrastructure and market, right? So as a region, we still have a lot to work on in terms of political stability. Even, I mean, other than Singapore, everyone else has the similar problem where the government is still very unstable, corrupted, and they're not currently looking at the good of the overall population yet. But if I'm hoping that this is more of a personal reflection onto this. I'm hoping that with our step coming into play, we have other players within the region to kind of oversee ASEAN. I'm hoping that they would influence our leader to move in a certain direction that would help stabilize the political instability, for the lack of a better term.
Well, for what it's worth, I know Motorola invested more than 30 years ago heavily in the Penang, Malaysia region. So I think, I think Motorola and others have been very progressive in understanding the opportunities and the potential of this
Yeah,
region.
yeah.
As an
It's just that
American,
with,
go ahead.
yep.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, as an American looking at your presentation and listening to it, I can't help but think we really messed up by withdrawing from TPP. On the other hand, is IPEF really going to make up for that loss, or is IPEF just basically going to stabilize things and we can never make up for the loss of TPP?
Only stabilizing things. I was reading some comments about the IPEP, and they said that because there's no tariff incentives in any way, it's just a framework. It's pretty much an empty shell. How are you going to compete with a very powerful East Asian nations that are now trading freely in this big region with 1/3 of the world's population? I'm not sure how US is going to approach that unless they could come up with another trade agreement with this bloc. They're within 20 years or so, they're not going to be able to compete with all the trade that's going on in this big RCEP region, because we're now including not only ASEAN but also second largest economy in the world right here, and then in South Japan and Korea.
I hear you. So I guess I'll turn it around on you and ask you, how did you grow in this process of going through this analysis? It seems like this was much more than a typical research project for an MEM student.
Oh.
It doesn't fit the mold, let's put it that way, right?
Okay. I think personally it grew on me because I also came from the region. I think growing up, or at least spend my first few years in Thailand, has this project made me really hopeful for what is in front of us, like our future. Like there's a lot of wishes and dream for the region to develop and grow, and it has reached a certain like standard that everyone is having a good quality of life. Currently, we're still growing rapidly. However, it is still like not everyone has the same opportunity that we would have in the Western world. But then just looking at the research that I have done, and with the potential of growth that we see, there's a lot of hopes, like a lot of hope that like one day you can come back. I mean, you can go back home and develop something. There's also a lot of opportunities in businesses. Like I think my long-term career goal is to eventually, hopefully, go home and then start a business somewhere, or some in a sector that is growing, either sustainability or energy, or infrastructure. So I think with that value in mind, I think it's a bit more personal when I did this research, but it's also a lot of knowledge that's gained. Like, wow, okay, we are actually growing. We have a lot of potentials. We have a lot of money incoming, a lot of opportunities. But at the same time, there's a drive to like, okay, now that we know that this is going, what can I do to actually make it a reality, right? Because yeah, we're assuming, okay, we're growing, but like reality is like, if we're not stable as a region, it is going to be a difficult road ahead for these countries.
Some other factors might be engineering schools, the ability to produce enough engineers and technologists. I'm not sure what your capacity is. I know there's some great schools in Singapore. I believe Indonesia's got some excellent schools.
Honestly, I think we have very good students and engineers.
Okay.
It's just that they have been suppressed by the system.
Yeah,
we send kids to like Math Olympia and won a few times. We have very high math and science scores. However, it's like, what's prohibiting us to grow into the world stage is definitely one language. When the education system has not been improved because the government didn't see the reason to bring up everyone, that kind of restrain us from going into the world stage. But within the country itself, we have a lot of potentials. It just that it comes back around to like, yeah, we have a lot of potential, but how do we fix the political climate within the region to actually, surpass and then get through the glass ceiling?
Right. Well, again, an excellent job. I think this is well worthy of putting on our website. If you don't mind, we're going to be posting this on our YouTube channel unless you have any objections. Thank you for a great job, and I look forward to reading your final report. Let's
you.
finish up today's presentations. I'm going to be stopping the recording for this one and getting